Greetings, book lovers everywhere. I'm E-Train and welcome to E-Train Talks, where I discuss everything books in the hopes of inspiring others to love reading as much as I do. Today, I'm thrilled to be talking with a fellow book lover, middle school librarian, and former language arts teacher with 25 years of experience in middle school education, Stacy Nockowitz. Stacy also happens to be the author of The Prince of Steel Pier, woo! A thrilling middle grade realistic fiction novel about a 13-year-old Jewish boy's summer adventures while staying in Atlantic City with his grandparents. Thank you so much for joining me today, Stacy. I've been looking forward to talking to you about your very entertaining debut novel, The Prince of Steel Pier.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to this too. I've been looking forward to meeting you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to meeting you as well. So I've had the honor of meeting a number of Jewish authors over the past couple of weeks, and I'm so proud to be able to talk about The Prince of Steel Pier, another great middle grade book with a Jewish protagonist. Joey's story is such a fun read. There's a lot that kids today can relate to, even though the story takes place in the 70s. A perfect coming-of-age read for all you middle grade book fans out there. And on that note, I'm so excited to find out about your writing journey, Stacy, and I've put together a few questions for you.
Excellent. I'm ready.
And I hope you're ready because the first question is a good one. So The Prince of Steel Pier explores such themes as family connections, Judaism, and courage. Why did you decide to incorporate these messages into your thrilling and interesting realistic fiction novel?
Well, I'd say, I don't think that there's enough children's literature out there that speaks to the Jewish experience. There's more now than there ever was, but I thought I had something to add because this wasn't a time period that's written about all that often, certainly not from a Jewish character's point of view. And I thought that it would be kind of interesting to add that in a story that wasn't, set in World War II and the Holocaust, but also not set in modern times and, the 21st century. So I wanted to kind of get the Jewish experience at a time that isn't often written about. So that's why I really wrote about that. And family connections, I think that that's part of the Jewish experience. I think that family is so central to any Jewish person and any Jewish author. And so I knew that family would be, the most important part of the book.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be a Jewish novel if there weren't some family components. And I'm really glad that you wrote The Prince of Steel Pier in the 70s. I had never really read a book from a Jewish perspective in that time period, like you said. So I think it really can give the readers a new perspective about certain ideals. And also, I got to learn about it's kind of also like, it's hard to really put The Prince of Steel Pier into one genre, one variety. And I think that that's a really interesting kind of aspect to The Prince of Steel Pier. Like, it's in the 70s, but that isn't really historical fiction, but it's also not contemporary. So it's all it's just a fun story, and it doesn't really need to be put into one category. And there are so many different genres. It's all kind of everything that I want from a middle grade book packed into one thrilling read.
Oh, I love to hear that. That's what I was going for. I think that, I grew up in the 70s and just have a lot of memories of that time. And I think that it's something worth sharing. There are a lot of things that took place during that time that kids today can really relate to. So it was important for me to get that out there. And I think that having taught middle school and been a middle school librarian for so long, I have a really good idea of the kind of things that kids like to read in this age group. So I tried to think about how I could do that, but also include the Jewish experience with it.
Yeah, you did a really great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And when writing The Prince of Steel Pier, were there any parts taken from your own personal experiences? And were there any portions of the story more difficult to write than others?
Well, a lot of The Prince of Steel Pier was taken from my own personal experiences. My grandparents owned a kosher hotel on the boardwalk in Atlantic City when I was a little girl. It was the St. Charles Hotel, which was a historically, a very important hotel on the Atlantic City Boardwalk. It had been around for a long, long time, when my grandparents bought it. And it was right there on the boardwalk, at a time when there were a lot of those kinds of hotels on the boardwalk. There weren't the big casinos yet, which everyone associates with Atlantic City now, because casino gambling hadn't what's the word I'm looking for?
It hasn't
The
really
people of the
started.
state hadn't the people in the state hadn't voted to have gambling be legal in the state. So the hotels on the boardwalk were not big, glitzy hotels. They were these kind of mom and pop, uh, old hotels, and some of them were kosher, like my grandparents. And I have a lot of memories of my time at that hotel. Right there on the boardwalk, you could go right out the back onto the boardwalk, and then right across the boardwalk from the hotel was the beach. So I have a lot of memories of my time on the boardwalk, in the hotel, on the beach. And I tried to incorporate a lot of those personal experiences into the book. Now, I wouldn't say that any parts were really difficult to write, but originally I did have two scenes that were maybe kind of rough for a middle grade audience, and I ended up removing them and replacing them with different scenes. It was difficult. The difficult part was taking the scenes out that I thought were really good scenes, vivid scenes, and replacing them. But that's all part of the revision process, so it was no problem.
Well, I always love it when authors incorporate their experiences into their novels because it can really add even more relatability. And the experiences they feel real because a lot of them happens to the writer. And I also think that it's really interesting that Atlantic City, when we think of Atlantic City, we think of casinos, like you said, but we kind of don't really remember that it wasn't always casinos and gambling and stuff. So I
Right.
think that also kind of talking about the past and also the present. I don't know. I'm also looking for a word.
Well, it's historical in that, I mean, this did take place, 50 years ago, pretty much.
Yeah. Wow,
Um,
50.
Almost 50. But it is historical in that sense, but it's not historical in the sense that most of the things that Joey goes through are things that kids still go through today.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, Kids still have arguments with their older brothers or younger brothers. They still think that their younger brothers or younger sisters are a pain in the neck, and sometimes they want to get their parents. They can't wait to get away from their parents and kind of go out on their own and do their own thing. And they like to have their own experiences. Kids in that age range like to have their own experiences separate from their families too. So that was really important for me to show.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you did. And even though it was in the past, like you said, I really related to Joey Goodman and just kind of that state of independence, like wanting independence, wanting to do your own thing. I think that middle graders all over were like, we want to get away from you, mom and dad. We don't want to hear your lectures all the time. So, and also the 70s, they were a pretty fun time. And you could get away from your parents. So I
Yeah,
think
it was.
that,
Yeah, absolutely. It was a safe time. I always thought of it as a safe time.
mhm,
I don't know, maybe I'm looking at it through rose-colored glasses at this point,
yeah.
but it seemed like a safe time to me. I was able to, go out and run around on the boardwalk with my brother, who was 2 years older than me, and without our parents, and it was just a lot of fun. The 70s were a lot of fun, actually.
Well, it's always great to hear about just having fun on the boardwalk and
Oh
playing with
yeah,
your siblings and the short moments when you're not fighting.
right.
And I read that The Prince of Steel Pier has been chosen as a PJ Our Way book, one of my favorite Jewish themed book websites and Jewish book providers. So, would you share what the PJ library process is like as an author?
Sure. I mean, I have my agent to thank for connecting me with PJ Our Way. My agent, Rena Rosner, is Jewish, and she has worked with PJ in the past with some of her clients. And she was the one who really said, I think that we should send this book to PJ to see what they think. So I have her to thank for that. And she submitted my manuscript, and then the manuscript was awarded an Author's Incentive Award. It was accepted by PJ before we had a publishing contract, and I think that that really helped us get the book signed with a publisher. PJ actually, they have a lot of say in the content of the books, if there's content that they don't think is appropriate for their readers. So as I was saying before, I had those two scenes that were kind of rough scenes. They had a little bit of violence in them that maybe was more than what PJ felt their audience could handle. So that's why I took those scenes out. And they help you along with that process of revising until they get it to the point where they think it's appropriate for their audience. So the book is going to be a PJ Our Way selection in October, and I'm really excited about that. I think it's been great working with PJ. I haven't had a ton of contact with them, just here and there, but they're really great people, and I've really enjoyed working with them. I hope I get to work with them again.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if you keep working on those fun Jewish themed novels. And PJ Our Way and PJ Library, that like ever since I was probably two, I've received picture books, middle grade books, different varieties from PJ Our Way, PJ Library, and the whole kind of crew. And I just being able to connect with an author of a PJ Our Way book is just it's such a meaningful experience, going from always reading the PJ Library books to actually talking with one of the PJ authors. It's just really interesting. And I've always wondered about the process. Like, is PJ Library like a kind of a publisher in a sense, or helps you get your book published? So receiving this information is pretty enlightening and insightful. So thank you.
Yeah, they of course. It's PJ does have a publishing. PJ has PJ Publishing now,
Oh,
which I think is fairly new. So they are publishing a couple of books. I don't know how many picture books they're publishing, but I know that they've published or will be publishing a couple of middle grade books. But the PJ Library and PJ Our Way are separate from that. My book was accepted by PJ Our Way, and then it was bought by Carben Publishing, which is a Jewish publisher,
mhm.
and so that's who's publishing my book. And I think that the PJ Publishing books are also going to be PJ Our Way selections
Oh.
coming up, so that's good too.
Yeah, that's such an interesting process,
Mhm.
and I'm really inspired learning from that. And so for everybody listening, The Prince of Steel Pier is a realistic fiction story that takes place in the 70s about a 13-year-old Jewish boy spending his summer vacation with his grandparents at their struggling hotel in Atlantic City. And then soon he finds himself drawn into a dangerous crowd and has to figure out how to work his way out of a possible, horrible, scary situation with the mob. Without giving any story spoilers away, what inspired you to create this storyline?
That's a great question, and I'm asked that a lot. I'm really inspired by old movies. Well, I think of them as old now, even though I think that anything that was any movies that were made like in the 90s, 80s, 70s, and earlier, I think of as old movies at this point. And there was a great movie that came out in the early 90s called A Bronx Tale. And that was based on a play A Bronx Tale, written by Chaz Palminteri, and Chaz Palminteri made the movie as well. And that movie is about a kid on a block in the Bronx who kind of becomes involved with this mobster guy, and he's involved with him for a lot of years of his life. But that idea is what inspired me. The idea of a regular kid on the block just getting involved with a group of mobsters was just cool to me. My husband and I are huge fans of a lot of mobster movies and shows like The Godfather and The Sopranos. And I come from New Jersey, of course, where the mob is kind of part of the culture of the state. So that really inspired me. All my past movies that I've seen about mobsters, but also A Bronx Tale specifically.
Wow. So receiving inspiration from movies, I've never really heard that before. So I can tell that that's a pretty entertaining tale, and also kind of being able to really write your stories based off of your favorite movies. I think that that's a pretty cool experience, and that's also like you can go back to the movies over and over, and that's one excuse to watch your favorite movies nonstop.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I I did watch A Bronx Tale many times as I was writing this book, but I didn't want to make it, you know, like a middle grade version of A Bronx Tale. I wanted to put my special story into it, and that's also why it has the Jewish family,
Yeah.
because I wanted to add that element to it. Um, but I find movies really inspiring, especially movies from like the 70s and 80s, which I think had this really wonderful style. And I don't know that too many movies today have the same kind of that kind of storytelling style. So that's why I really love those movies, and they really inspire me.
Well, as long as they're kid movies and okay for me to watch, I'd love to watch some mobster movies soon.
Well, A Bronx Tale, I think you're probably around the right age to start watching A Bronx Tale. So
All right,
maybe
I'll
look
tell
that
my
one up.
mom. Hopefully she agrees. And my next question is, after coming up with the idea for the Prince of Steel Pier, how long did it take you to write your novel?
Well, I came up with the idea for the scene in the diner where Joey meets the mobsters first. I just saw that scene in my head and started writing it. And that was sometime in 2017. And then the next scene I had in my head was the scene where Joey is playing skee ball and the crowd is betting on him. That was a really fun scene to write.
Yeah.
Um, I'd say in all, the book took me a little over a year to write and then another year to revise. So I wrote it between 2017 and 2018, and then it sold in 2019.
Wow. So a very long process, and now finally you're getting your novel published in 2020.
Finally, it feels, yeah, I mean, it has been a really long process when, now that I think about it. And when I signed with Carben to have them publish the book, they said come out in 2022, and it just felt like that was so far in the future. I didn't know, I like couldn't even imagine it. And now here it is, just a couple months away. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like an exciting time. And speaking of, are you currently working on any upcoming novels or short stories? And if so, can you share something about what you're writing?
Sure. I just finished a manuscript for my next novel, which is also historical fiction and is about a Jewish boy, a 12-year-old Jewish boy. This story takes place in the Bronx in the early 1950s. And at that time, I don't know if you know a lot about that time, but the Cold War between the United States and Russia was really in full force in the 1950s. The Russians and the US were in kind of a race to see who could get uh, the first rocket into space.
Yeah.
And also, the communists had, taken over Russia. So people in the United States were really afraid that the communists were going to try to take over the US government. And there was a lot going on at that time with this fear of communism. And so a lot of that time was called the Red Scare. And so this book is about a boy who lives in the Bronx in the early 1950s, and he meets a girl whose father is a writer, a television writer, but he's been blacklisted. In other words, the government thinks that he's a communist, and so he lost his job as a television writer, and he can't get another job. So that happened to a lot of writers and actors and producers from television and film back in that time period, that they were blacklisted. And this book is actually also based on another movie that's about that time, and it's called The Front. And it's a movie that took place that was done in the 70s. It was from 1976, but it took place in the early 50s, and a lot of elements of The Front are in my new book. So again, it's that relationship to old movies, and it also connects to Judaism, because a lot of the people who were accused of being communists were Jewish writers and actors and producers. So it has that element to it too.
Well, I can't wait to read that. And I know that everybody listening, they're probably like, ooh, another middle grade story to binge read.
Yeah.
And I haven't really read many stories from the 1950s and about the Cold War, also with Jewish aspects. So I'm really interested to learn more about that time period. And even though it's a realistic fiction, historical fiction kind of read, I know that I'm going to learn a lot. So I can't wait.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think you will learn a lot. It's there are a number of books written about that time period, but not very many of them from the Jewish perspective. So that's what I wanted to get in there.
And I am so excited for that novel to come out. And
Excellent.
not everybody listening is probably aware of how much experience you have with middle schoolers. How has your experience as an educator and librarian helped you with your writing?
Well, as you said at the beginning of this, I've worked with middle school students for a really long time. I always knew I wanted to, when I decided that I wanted to become a teacher, I knew that I wanted to be a middle school teacher. That was the age group that really interested me the most. Maybe because that time was so important to me when I was a kid. And it certainly was the time when I was reading nonstop, like you know,
Yeah.
I just read all the time. And I wanted to be a writer from the time I was a little kid. So, I became a teacher for that age group. And through the years, it's influenced my writing, because I've been able to choose the books that I really want the kids to read, the books that I felt had a great influence on me, as well as newer books that I really wanted these kids to get the experience with. I couldn't let these kids get through middle school without reading certain books. So that was always the most fun for me, was teaching about the books like The Phantom Tollbooth and The Giver and The Outsiders. And
The Outsiders is so great.
yeah, The Outsiders is so great. And, so a lot of books like that I really wanted kids to have the opportunity to read. And then I became a librarian, and I became a middle school librarian. And that just opened up all these doors for me as far as knowing middle grade literature even better. Because that's my whole day is immersed in middle grade books. So it's really helped me a lot with the writing. I think that I've been influenced by a lot of writers who I like to read, middle grade writers, and just getting to know them through author visits and things like this, like interviews. I've been able to get to know a lot of middle grade authors and really get to understand the process of writing a middle grade book. So it's been very helpful to be involved with middle grade kids for all these years.
And now for my last question of the day. This is the one that I ask every single person that I interview. If you could be or meet any literary character, fictional or real, who would it be and why?
I know this isn't a particularly unique choice, but I'd have to say if I could meet any literary character, I would want to meet Elizabeth Bennet from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. She's just a feminist hero to me, and I would love to get to know her. I think that Pride and Prejudice is, one of those classic books that you should also read when you get older. And Lizzie Bennet, she's the boss. I really love her, and I would love to meet her. Her whole family, actually, but Lizzie most of all.
Well, Pride and Prejudice is such a famous novel, and you don't really need to have an original answer. Just say what your heart wants to believe, and I really need to read Pride and Prejudice when I'm older, of course.
Yeah.
I've heard such great things about it. And unfortunately, that's our final question of the day. I had so much fun learning about the Prince of Steel Pier and everything Jewish-themed books. And you've done so much to promote literacy over the past 25 years, or just your whole life, just reading novels and loving books. From teaching, and yeah, so just thank you so much for sharing your writing journey. And for those who've not yet read The Prince of Steel Pier, you need to read it. You really do, when it comes out in September. So be sure to listen to my book review podcast so you can learn a little bit more about the story, because we don't have 4.5 minutes to just share the entire summary. So okay, I don't know what I'm saying right now. So for those who've not yet read The Prince of Steel Pier, be sure to listen to my book review podcast to learn more about the novel. And I highly recommend you read Stacy Nockowitz's engaging, coming-of-age, page-turning middle grade read. It's a book you do not want to let pass you by.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for joining me. And
it's been a pleasure.
When your novel comes out in September on the shelves, I know people are going to be raving about your Jewish-themed novel, and when it comes out on PJ Our Way in October. And I'll be sure to leave the first review on PJ Our Way.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for all you're doing for middle grade books too. I mean, you're wonderful. I think that what you're doing is fantastic, and you're just such a great advocate for middle grade reads.
Well, thank you. And I'm just in awe of your answers. And you're giving me so many recommendations for movies and books, and I really have to just run to my mom after the interview and say, I need to read this. I need to watch this. We need to do it now.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
And everybody listening, keep checking back on my Twitter, my website, and also Stacy's Twitter and website to learn more about everything that's kind of going on in the Prince of Steel Pier world, and Joey Goodman and co. All that he's doing, and the countdown for the release. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep reading. Bye.